Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the pain you thought you were desperate to escape has been the quietest companion you've ever had. You've cursed it, resented it, begged for its departure, yet when it leaves, even for a moment, you feel a strange emptiness, as though part of you has been ripped away. How is it that misery, something you claim to despise, has become a home you can't stop returning to? Consider this. If someone were to offer you absolute happiness, life stripped of suffering, fear, and longing, would you truly take it? Or would a part of you hesitate, gripped by a whispering voice that wonders, who would I even be without my pain? It's an unsettling paradox, isn't it? We claim to desire freedom from our suffering, yet, when the chance to escape appears, most of us cling to our chains. Why? Why do we creatures obsessed with comfort and relief seem so magnetically drawn back to the very darkness we claim to hate? Why do people nurse grudges long after the wound has healed, replay humiliations on an endless loop, or sabotage the rare moments of joy they manage to seize? The truth is more disturbing than we'd like to admit. Misery feels safe. Not pleasant, not kind, but safe. It has defined the edges of our lives for so long that its absence feels like walking into a void, one where you can't tell where you end and the unknown begins. This is why people stay in toxic relationships. This is why some keep jobs that corrode their soul. This is why some continue to live as prisoners of their past, even when the gates are wide open. And if you think you're immune, pause for a moment and examine the last time you were truly content. Did you savor it? Or did your mind immediately begin rehearsing the moment it would end, preparing you for the inevitable disappointment? We live in an age of unprecedented access to distraction, stimulation, and pleasure. Yet our inner lives are filled with recycled suffering. Some of it is inherited. Some of it is chosen. And some of it, perhaps the most dangerous kind, is unconscious. But here's where the paradox deepens. The more we try to escape misery, every time you tell yourself, I should not feel this way, you give that feeling more power. Every time you run from sadness, you carve deeper pathways for it to follow you. Misery isn't just an emotion, it's a pattern. It's a patterns. Once ingrained, become identity. So here's the real, haunting question. If you've been living inside misery for years, who are you outside of it? Who are you when you're not replaying the heartbreak, the betrayal, the injustice? When you're not busy fighting old battles in your mind or nursing wounds that have long since scarred? The terrifying possibility is this. Perhaps you don't. No, perhaps none of us do. Because misery is more than just suffering. It's familiarity, it's structure. It's the crutch we lean on to give our chaos meaning. And so we hold it close not because we love it, but because we don't know what stands on the other side of letting go. Misery, in its twisted way, becomes proof that we've lived, that we've felt deeply. We're still connected to something, anything if, that something is our pain. And if that's true, then the real question isn't, why am I miserable? The real question is, who would I be if I stopped being miserable? Do you see the depth of that? Misery is not just a feeling, it's a mirror. It reflects the stories we've been telling ourselves since childhood. The inherited griefs of our parents, the silent compromises we've made with life. To let it go would mean facing an unbearable silence, a self that has no excuse. No narrative, no shield. But here's the thought that should keep you awake tonight. What if misery isn't just an accident of living, but a choice? What if beneath the surface of your consciousness you've been choosing it? Not because you want to hurt, but because you don't know how to exist without it. What if the thing you've been trying so hard to destroy is the very thing that keeps you feeling alive? This is where we must begin, not with solutions, not with promises of quick relief, but with the courage to look misery in the eye and ask, why do I need you? And that is where the real journey begins. To understand why we are addicted to our own misery, we must first confront an uncomfortable truth. Misery is not merely something that happens to us. It is something we participate in, shape, and at times unknowingly protect. It is not just the storm battering the walls of our consciousness. It is the house we built for ourselves, brick by brick. Out of every disappointment, betrayal, and rejection we've endured, Carl Jung once wrote, "Till you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." This is where the roots of misery lie, the shadowy, unexamined corners of our psyche where pain has been allowed to harden into identity. From childhood, we absorb narratives about who we are: the unworthy one, the unlucky one, the abandoned one, the burden. These stories, repeated enough times, become the scaffolding upon which we build our entire understanding of the world. Misery becomes the lens through which we see everything, not because it's accurate, but because it's familiar. Consider the child who learns early that love is conditional, dependent on performance or compliance. That child grows into an adult who unconsciously seeks relationships that echo that conditionality, not because they want to suffer, but because the pain feels like home. Or think of the individual who, after years of humiliation, wears self-pity. Like armor, preemptively embracing defeat so the sting of failure feels less sharp when it inevitably comes. This is how misery transforms from a temporary emotion into a self-sustaining cycle. We begin to organize our lives around it. But why? Why does the human psyche cling to suffering, even when logic tells us to let it go? The answer, at least in part, lies in our need for coherence. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, observed that human beings can endure unimaginable suffering as long as they can find meaning within it. Misery, in its dark way, provides a sense of narrative continuity. It gives us a reason for why things are the way they are. In the absence of suffering, there is no story, no explanation, no thread connecting our past to our present. Without our pain, we feel disoriented, unanchored, like characters who have been ripped out of their own plot. Arthur Schopenhauer offered another grim insight, that suffering is the default state of human existence, and that our moments of happiness are merely brief reprieves from the baseline of pain. Though his view was bleak, there's a psychological echo in it, one that explains why we so easily slip back into misery even after moments of joy. It's not simply that we are unlucky or cursed. It's that our nervous system has been wired over years to expect suffering. We anticipate it. We brace for it. And when it arrives, it feels strangely like confirmation. Ah, yes, this is how life really is. Neurology reinforces this idea. Misery creates predictable patterns in the brain ruts of thought that, once deeply carved, are difficult to escape. Over time, these patterns become addictive. Not pleasurable, but addictive. The familiar cycle of self-criticism, rumination, and despair provides a grotesque sense of safety, a cognitive rhythm we know by heart. Our misery becomes like an old song we can't stop playing, even when it drags us deeper into despair. Then there's Nietzsche, who spoke of the will to power, the innate drive in human beings to assert meaning and mastery over their existence. Here lies one of the most paradoxical truths about misery. It can become a perverse form of control. When life feels chaotic and uncontrollable, clinging to our suffering allows us to claim ownership of at least one thing: our pain. Misery becomes a way of saying, "This is mine. This story, however tragic, belongs to me." But perhaps the most insidious root of misery lies in its ability to shield us from transformation. Sartre once wrote about the concept of bad faith, the self-deception we employ to avoid the terrifying freedom of choosing our lives. Misery in this context is not just a habit, it's a refuge. If we stay miserable, we don't have to confront the vast, frightening possibilities of change. If we stay stuck in old wounds, we don't have to risk new failures, new heartbreaks, new disappointments. In this way, misery becomes both prison and sanctuary. It limits us, but it also protects us from the unbearable weight of freedom. When you piece all of this together, a grim picture emerges. Our misery is not simply an emotional state, it is an intricate, self-reinforcing ecosystem. It is built from the trauma we've endured, the narratives we've inherited, the neurological grooves we've worn into our brains, and the existential bargains we've struck with ourselves. And here is where the real danger lurks. When misery becomes identity, when suffering becomes the defining feature of who we believe we are, letting it go doesn't feel like healing, it feels like death. To release our misery would mean dismantling the scaffolding of our very selves. and so we keep it. We nurture it. We tell ourselves we're waiting for the right time to heal, but secretly, we are terrified of who we might become without it. If you're honest with yourself, does this resonate? Can you feel how misery has become woven into your sense of self? This is why simply thinking positive doesn't work. This is why affirmations bounce off the walls of our pain without penetrating. We cannot cut misery out like a tumor because it has roots in everything we are. We can't amputate it without also amputating pieces of ourselves. So, if misery is so deeply embedded in our psychology, what happens when we live with it long enough? How does it quietly shape our lives, our relationships, our societies? The answer is not just unsettling, it's devastating. If misery were only an internal, tormented, dark corner of the mind we visited when alone, it would already be unbearable. But it rarely stays confined within us. Misery is contagious, seeps into everything we touch, quietly reshaping the way we love, work, dream, and live. And its most terrifying trick? It disguises itself as normalcy. Think about the last time you felt deeply unhappy. Did you tell anyone? Or did you put on the familiar mask? I'm fine, it's nothing, just tired. That mask, worn too long, fuses to the face. Misery doesn't just sit inside us, it leaks outward, shaping how others experience us. It alters our tone when we speak. It colors how we interpret the words of friends and partners. It makes us defensive when no attack is coming, suspicious. When no betrayal exists, cynical even when life offers us a chance at joy. Misery rewrites the script of every conversation we have, not only with others, but with ourselves. And here lies one of its most insidious consequences. We begin to unconsciously recreate the very conditions that keep us miserable. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, our tendency to seek out evidence that supports what we already believe. If you believe you're unworthy, you will filter out every act of kindness and focus on every perceived slight. If you believe the world is cruel, you will find cruelty everywhere. You will twist neutral moments into daggers aimed at your heart. Slowly, without realizing it, you will curate a reality that matches your misery. This is why people who've been hurt often attract more hurt. It's why those who've been abandoned cling desperately to those most likely to leave. It's why, as Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Misery does not simply sit inside of us, it quietly programs us, turning us into architects of our own suffering. Now extend this pattern outward. What happens when a society full of miserable individuals interacts? You get workplaces where burnout is mistaken for dedication. You get relationships where resentment replaces intimacy. You get communities that thrive on outrage, where collective misery becomes a bonding mechanism, and where anger becomes a substitute for connection. Misery, shared and multiplied, creates cultures that worship struggle but quietly despise hope. Consider the digital world we inhabit, the endless scrolling, the dopamine loops, the outrage bait. Social media algorithms are not designed for joy, they are designed for engagement, and misery is profoundly engaging. Outrage spreads faster than optimism. Despair pulls more attention than delight, so our misery becomes not just personal, but systemic, profitable even, yet the consequences cut deeper than the external. Misery robs us of time, our most irreplaceable currency. How many hours have you lost replaying arguments in your head? How many nights have you spent crafting imaginary confrontations, rewriting the past, rehearsing pains that will never change? Misery tricks us into believing we are processing our wounds when, in truth, we are simply reliving them. It doesn't stop there. Neuroscience shows us that chronic emotional pain reshapes the brain, heightening our stress responses, dulling our capacity for joy, and making new experiences feel less rewarding. This creates a vicious cycle. The more miserable we are, the harder it becomes to access the very states that could heal us: curiosity, openness, play, trust, and perhaps the cruelest consequence of all. Misery robs us of ourselves. Think of who you were before the world taught you to wear your wounds like armor, before you learned to shrink yourself to avoid rejection, before you decided it was safer to expect disappointment than to risk hope. That version of you still exists, buried under the layers of self-protection misery has wrapped around you. But with each passing year of rehearsing pain, of replaying old stories, that self becomes harder to access. Philosophically, this is the tragedy Sartre warned of when he spoke about bad faith. We mistake our misery for inevitability, and in doing so, abandon our freedom. We accept the roles misery assigns us: the victim, the martyr, the failure, the outcast. We convince ourselves we are being realistic, but in truth, we are being imprisoned. And this prison does not have bars. It has rituals. It has routines. It has the familiar pathways of your thoughts, the well-worn grooves of your habits. The little bargains you make with yourself. It's better to expect the worst. At least I won't be surprised. It's better to stay where I am than to risk something worse. Safer to be numb than to be broken again. In this way, misery becomes self-sustaining not because it is pleasant, but because it is known. And the unknown, no matter how promising, terrifies us more than the pain we've already mastered. Do you see how deep this goes? Misery doesn't just make us sad, quietly defines the parameters of our existence. It tells us who we are allowed to be, what we are allowed to hope for, and how much joy we are permitted to feel. It's a parasite that convinces its host it is part of the body. And so the haunting question emerges. If misery has shaped us so completely, how do we begin to live without it? The answer is not simple. It requires nothing less than rebellion. Radical refusal to keep feeding the very patterns that have trapped us. But rebellion, as you will see, is not what you think. Rebellion in this context isn't what most people imagine. It's not about becoming louder or tougher or forcing happiness on yourself like a mask. It's about doing something far more radical, far more frightening, dismantling the identity you've built around your misery and daring to exist without it. This is why so few attempt it. Misery offers us a script, and we've been reciting it for years. To break free means ripping up that script with no replacement in hand. It means walking into the uncharted territory of who you could be if you were no longer defined by your wounds. And that is terrifying because even if misery is killing us slowly, it has also kept us safe from the unpredictable chaos of freedom. The first step of rebellion, then, is to name the cage. To make the unconscious conscious, as Jung demanded. To stop calling your patterns just how I am and recognize them for what they are. Defenses built in response to pain that no longer serve you. If you find yourself replaying failures, ask, what am I protecting myself from by staying in this loop? If you keep sabotaging relationships, ask, who told me love had to hurt for it to be real? This is the deep, uncomfortable work of pulling misery up by its roots, and you cannot do it by thinking positive or burying your pain under platitudes. You do it by interrogating your suffering until you understand what purpose it has been serving in your life, and then choosing deliberately to stop letting it define you. Nietzsche spoke of the need for becoming. You believe that true. Freedom wasn't about escaping suffering, but about transforming it. It's integrating it into something that elevates rather than diminishes you. This is the heart of rebellion, refusing to let misery remain a stagnant pool and instead using it as raw material for growth. Pain, when harnessed, can become strength. Trauma, when integrated, can become wisdom. But here's the paradox. To transform suffering, you must first stop running from it. You must meet it head-on. That means sitting with your misery without judgment, without rushing to fix it, and asking, what are you here to teach me? It means facing the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, the child who felt unwanted, the adult who feels unworthy, the dreamer who still longs for a life they've been too afraid to pursue. This is not glamorous work. It's quiet, raw, and often lonely. It requires you to practice what the Buddhists call radical acceptance, acknowledging reality as it is, without clinging to what should have been. It means no longer defining yourself by your scars, but by what you choose to build despite them. The next step is perhaps even harder, reclaiming authorship of your life. Sartre's idea of radical freedom that we are condemned to be free feels like a burden when you first grasp it, because freedom means there are no excuses. You cannot keep pointing to your pain as the reason you do not live fully. You cannot blame the past for the choices you continue to make today. You cannot hide behind the identity misery gave you. Rebellion, then, is about taking responsibility not for what happened to you, but for what you do with it. It's about refusing to let your suffering remain the central story of your life. How do you do this? You begin by disrupting the rituals that keep your misery alive. You notice when you're rehearsing an old wound and ask, is this serving me, or is this just familiar? You challenge the narratives. Misery whispers, I am unworthy. I am doomed. I am broken. You stop feeding them with unexamined agreement. You replace them not with hollow affirmations, but with truthful, liberating statements like, this pain is part of me, but it is not all of me. My story does not end here. You also begin to experiment with joy not as a reward for healing, but as a practice that disrupts the hold misery has on your nervous system. Joy feels unnatural at first, even threatening, but each moment you allow yourself to laugh without guilt, dream without self-sabotage, or feel peace without bracing for its loss. You weaken misery's grip. Importantly, rebellion is not solitary. Misery thrives in isolation, convinces you that no one could understand your pain, that you must carry it alone. Breaking free often requires connection, finding others who have walked similar paths, allowing yourself to be seen in your rawness, and letting their stories expand your vision of what's possible. And finally, rebellion requires patience. Misery doesn't dissolve overnight. The brain pathways that sustain it were built over years. New pathways must be carved with intention, repetition, and compassion. You will slip back into old patterns. You will hear misery calling you home. But each time you resist, each time you choose something different, curiosity over rumination, gratitude over despair, you're practicing your freedom. This is rebellion, not a single act, but a way of living. Refusal to keep reciting the same tragic lines when you were always meant to write a new story. But if rebellion is the way out, what lies beyond it? What happens when misery no longer defines you, when you've burned the old script and begun to live as someone unrecognizable to your past self? That is where the ultimate truth awaits. Here is the hardest truth to swallow. Misery was never just your captor. It was also your mirror. It reflected the unspoken parts of youth, a wounded child, the silenced dreamer, the grieving self who thought nobody cared. It kept you company when the world felt indifferent, gave you a script to follow when life felt meaningless. And for all its brutality, misery was familiar. It was something you could name, something you could predict, something you could cling to when everything else slipped through your fingers. But here's the revelation you may have been avoiding. You are not your misery. Pause on that. Let it settle. You have lived so long inside pain that you began to believe it defined you. You thought your identity was built from your heartbreaks, your traumas, your failures. You believed that without your wounds, you would be nothing. Blank, meaningless void. But what if the opposite is true? What if the misery you clung to was never who you were, but only the shadow cast by who you could become? The great philosophers and mystics have hinted at this for centuries. Jung spoke of individuation, becoming whole by integrating our shadow rather than being ruled by it. Nietzsche spoke of becoming the Bermensch, one who creates their own values, unbound by inherited narratives. Frankl taught that meaning isn't something handed to us, but something we create, even in suffering. And the Buddhists have always known the self you think you are, the one defined by pain, by stories, by egos and illusion. This is the ultimate truth. Misery is not proof of your aliveness, nor is it the essence of your being. It is a layer thick, sticky, convincing that has covered something far greater. Your freedom to create yourself. Freedom, that is what lies on the other side of misery. But here's the paradox that terrifies us into clinging to our pain. Freedom is not comfortable. It is vast. It is empty. It is possibility without guarantees. Misery may hurt, but it is safe. Freedom liberates, but it also exposes you to the unbearable truth that you are the author of your existence. You cannot hide behind your suffering once you accept this. This is why letting go of misery feels like death, because in a way it is. It is the death of the old self, the one who found identity in wounds. It is the death of the roles misery assigned you, the victim, the martyr, the abandoned one, the tragic hero. And death, even symbolic death, terrifies us. But only through this death do you finally taste life. Imagine this. You wake up one morning, and for the first time you do not define yourself by what was done to you. You do not rehearse the old stories of who hurt you, who left you, who failed you. You do not filter every moment through the expectation of disappointment. Instead, you look at the blank page of your life and realize it is yours to write. No one prepared you for this kind of responsibility. No one told you that true freedom doesn't feel like happiness at first. It feels like vertigo. But gradually, you see that you are no longer tethered to the past. You're not condemned to repeat old patterns. You're not obligated to keep reliving yesterday's pain. And this is when a new, almost unbearable question arises. If I am no longer my misery, who am I? The answer is both terrifying and liberating. Whoever you choose to be. You are the one who assigns meaning to your scars. You are the one who decides whether your past is a prison or a foundation. You are the one who can rewrite the story not by erasing the pain, but by reframing it as the soil from which something extraordinary can grow. This is the ultimate rebellion, not just against misery, but against the part of you that believed you were powerless. Understand this. Misery does not disappear the moment you decide to let it go. It will return like a phantom, testing your resolve. But each time you refuse to let it dictate your identity, its power weakens. You begin to see misery not as a master, but as a messenger and invitation to examine where you are still living small, still clinging to old narratives, still refusing to step into the vastness of your freedom. And eventually, you realize something profound. Misery was never the enemy. It was the teacher that brought you here, to this threshold where you can finally choose to live. So what now? Now you decide. You decide whether to keep rehearsing the old story or to write a new one. You decide whether to keep living as the sum of your wounds or as the architect of your becoming. You decide whether misery remains your home more simply, becomes a room you occasionally visit, no longer trapped inside. This is the ultimate truth. You are not what happened to you. You are not the voice that tells you you're unworthy. You are not the collection of scars you've memorized, or the blank space beneath it all the terrifying, magnificent freedom to create yourself anew. And perhaps that's why we cling to misery for so long, because deep down we know that once we let it go, there are no more excuses, no more scripts, no more cages, only possibility, only life, and that is a far greater burden than misery ever was. Picture this. You are standing at the edge of a cliff at dawn. Behind you is the long, winding path of your life, the heartbreaks you clung to, the losses you carried like holy relics, the familiar ache of every wound you've ever rehearsed. It is heavy, isn't it? So heavy that at times it felt safer to kneel beneath its weight than to imagine standing without it. But ahead, stretching beyond sight, is an expanse of light. No map, no script, just possibility. And for the first time, you feel it not the suffocating comfort of misery, but the terrifying freedom of choice. This is where most people turn back. This is why so many live and die inside their suffering, because to step forward means admitting that you are no longer defined by what broke you. It means giving up the story you've been reciting for years and daring to write one that no one, not even you, can predict. So here you are, toes at the edge, the wind on your face, and maybe for the first time, you understand, misery was never your identity. It was only the cage you outgrew, and the lock has been open all along. The question now isn't why you've been trapped, it's this. Are you finally ready to walk out?